The following audio is via a Skype call.
Welcome to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Get ready to find your free will from your roots in the stars.
Hi, I'm Sue Rose Minahan, host of Talk Cosmos, and today is December 8th, 2018, and we're discussing Sagittarius for the third of the 4 weeks. And today's subject is actually publishing, the Sagittarius arrow. To remind you, Jupiter is in its year cycle in its own sign of Sagittarius, and on a global collective Sagittarius energy that is symbolized by the half-man centaur archer, pointing to the beyond, seeking truth. We're all traveling on this mental excursion, physically or mentally, to worlds and perceptions beyond. And those cover philosophy, wisdom, truth, those long journeys, whether in body, mind, spirit, to find meaningfulness and essentially voicing our visions and ourselves. So that root energy of Jupiter in Sagittarius, which is the 9th house energy, the whole archetype, it revolves around our belief systems, our perceptions, our patterns and concepts. And most importantly, for today's subject, it involves publishing, because books, they shift our realities for either as an individual or for humanity. And it also offers that author the vehicle to express this voice that Sagittarius is really built to express, to be heard. So today, Talk Cosmos guest speaker is William Kenower. He's an author of Fearless Writing, How to Create Boldly and Write with Confidence. Another book is Write Within Yourself, an Author's Companion. I think I combined two of these books, Fearless Writing, and the other is How to Create Boldly and Write with Confidence. But William is also the editor-in-chief of Author magazine. And in addition to these books, he's been published in the New York Times, Writer's Digest, Edible Seattle, he is a Seattleite, Parent Map, and a featured blogger on the Huffington Post. William's a lecturer and coach, and he hosts a very popular podcast, Author to Author. So it's a great pleasure to say, hi, Bill.
Hi, Sue.
Yeah. You know, the first time we met, and perhaps the few times, was this wonderful roundtable that you produce at East West Books, which is a wonderful Yolanda bookstore that's in Seattle that has great events and stuff. So
that's right. I used to do I called it the Authors Roundtable, and anyone who wanted could come and we would talk about the experience and the challenges of being an author. That's right.
And they are many. I have great aspirations, and immediately you gave good sage advice, follow really the depth. So with your experience, it's on so many literature levels. I'm aware that you've written from plays to these books, and you bridge insights from talking to so many authors.
Yeah.
Yes. So, right off, go ahead. Yeah, right off the bat, just to express that publishing is connected with the Gutenberg press, I mean, it
goes back.
Yeah, it's like the shifting our entire perception, like agriculture did. So
yeah, it's true.
Yeah,
it's true. And so, publishing is so. The written word. I think about this sometimes, Sue, because I come from the arts, and the writing is distinctive amongst all the art forms. And I play music. I love music. And I did theater for a while. I acted. And my wife's a painter and illustrator. And all the art forms, whether it's the visual arts, the performing arts, involve the physical world in certain ways. In other words, if I'm acting, I'm using my body and my voice. If I'm playing the piano, I'm playing on the piano, like
So
the
true.
sound exists out in the physical world. Artists, for sure, sculpting or painting. But writing is distinctive because you are asked to render a three-dimensional temporal experience. That is, being a human being. It's in three dimensions. You have five senses. You're seeing things and tasting them. Time is progress. It's this three-dimensional physical world, but you're asked to render it into nothing but thought, because that's all writing is. It's thought. A sentence is a thought.
Yes.
And you're and it's the experience. I mean, this is true of all the arts to some degree, but the audience's experience of the artwork is purely private. You read it all alone, and the reader can draw all their own conclusions. Now, this goes on with all art forms, really, although a lot of the audience doesn't understand their role in the experience of the arts. They often attribute more to the artist than is actually attributable. But for reading, it's such a private, personal experience. What's been down on the page now is brought to the individual, the reader, and they have their own totally unique experience of that book. And it doesn't surprise me that Gutenberg the creation of the Gutenberg Bible Gutenberg Press, I think, accelerated, though my knowledge of history is a little sketchy around this. It was in sync with the Protestant movement.
Yes,
I
it
think.
was actually.
Wasn't it?
It was, because it
Yeah.
keeps coming up, and it had to do with Martin Luther, and he
Yeah.
tagged on the door,
That's right.
knowledge. But I love what you're saying, because I too am enthralled and worked with various art forms, and to signify this distinction really does clarify this act of writing, of publishing. You know, that it's personal.
Yes. It is unique, and I think it also points to that the human experience is the role thought plays in the human experience is impossible cannot be overstated. I think that thought is the beginning of all action. It is the source material of perception, and how we get about in the world depends entirely upon how we perceive it. And we are what we think about life so profoundly colors what we see, what we think we're seeing. That I think many people do not understand the role their own thinking is playing in the world they are experiencing. So much of life seems to be an outside-in experience, and yet, really, your life begins with thought, and what you think and what you believe and the thoughts you are holding in your mind so change what you are seeing. And that's one of the things I love about writing, is it makes me get clear about my thought and what it is, and choosing the thoughts that I want to share and the thoughts that I don't want to share. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, I was just reading about vision, because Sagittarius has to do about that vision. It's the beyond. And right now we're in a seed time. We're just bringing this into a little astrology, that the sun out there in its orbital path and Jupiter in its orbital path happen to be just a few degrees or the same degree. They just met on Monday, and the first time at 0 degrees in Sag since 1935. So we are in this a seed time, we might say, for the next years. But this whole idea of vision all goes back to thought again and again. The sages keep trying to remind us of this. So you are 100% on target.
Good vision. Yeah. Well, vision, it's an interesting thing with vision that I think when we talk about publishing, which is I'm the editor of Author Magazine, and I host Author to Author, and I used to host the Authors Roundtable, and my first book was Write Within Yourself, an Author's I talk a lot about being an author, and I do draw a distinction between writing and being a writer and being an author. The two similar roles, but writing is a private act, essentially. I mean, you do it alone. It's you and your muse or whatever it is you believe you're in communication with when you're writing. But to be an author, you become an author when you share your work with other people. And that really is where the trouble starts for most people. That's the challenging part. And the reason is that you, the author, the one who wrote the piece, has no control over what happens within the mind, within the imagination of the reader. That is their experience. And so this sort of disconnect, this sort of giving away of this thing you wrote, and then waiting to see what other people are going to think of it, is the source of a lot of the sort of magicalness of being an author. Because when I hear from people who've read my stuff and it has moved them and inspired them, and maybe they put a quote of something I read up and they put it up on their computer, and that is very magical to hear, because this is something I wrote usually to help myself, to please myself, to inspire myself. And this thing that I wrote has traveled by the sort of magical conveyances of publication out to some stranger, and then it's helped them. That's wonderful. So that's the great part of it. But as a writer, we have no control over what happens out there to this work that we create. We can't control whether someone likes it or doesn't like it, and we have to really trust that the piece will find the people it's meant to find, will have the experience it's meant to have. And a lot of writers, their anxiety, creative people, writers in particular, comes from not knowing what people are going to think of their stuff and not having any control over what people think of their stuff, whether they're going to like it or not, or give it reviews, bad reviews, rejection, and acceptance. It's very challenging. It's a very challenging relationship to the audience, letting them have their experience of it.
Well,
does that make sense?
It does, because it's vulnerable. Having written somewhat myself, when you say trust, that really spells it out. And the word surrender, I know with all art form, like painting, for instance, because I too, as I say, am stuck with all this need to create and to express in some realm. And there is releasing your child, you might say, this production that you've done. And also wondering, particularly with writing, how much the depths that one needs to speak from is like a buffet being put out, in the public, and then you're vulnerable. So
you're talking about the vulnerability you feel because you're putting something out that in many ways you believe you're not otherwise putting out, the perception is that the thing you're setting out there was had been private. Maybe you hadn't even known about it a way until you put it out there, right?
Good point.
Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah. And, it's really true. There is that sense that because, I think it's partly related to the experience of you go to a dinner party or something. And a lot of people are always, when we're talking socially, publicly, maybe maybe you feel free to talk about astrology at a party. Maybe you don't. Maybe you think, well, do people want to hear about this? This is my thing. But is it their thing? Maybe they want to talk about politics. Oh, he wants to talk about baseball. I don't want to talk about baseball. Whatever. But we often, I'm kind of a spiritual guy, and I have my beliefs. I'm not kind of a spiritual guy. It's really what I am. But I know some people want to hear about it. Some people don't. And so I sort of always am curbing what I want to say so it'll work within the group. I don't want to try and dominate things. Well, when you write, you got to lay it all out. You go to the page and say, this is what I believe. This is what matters to me. This is what interests me. And you lay it all out there. But I kept this idea that it's what you're putting out there is less secretive than what I put out there that seems secretive is far less secret than I think. I feel that people sense it off of me, although they don't put words to it. And so I write about myself all the time, Sue. That's all I write about now. And so I've learned that, well, actually, I'm gonna go one step further with it, which is that when people read something I've written, I've learned that they're not reading about me, even if the story they're reading is about a guy named Bill Kenower, and even if it's about something that happened to me. When they're reading about it, they're really reading about themselves. They're always reading about themselves. They're always translating this experience that I've described for themselves, putting themselves through it, reflecting on what it means to them. And in that way, I realize I'm not vulnerable because all I'm doing is using my life and experiences from my life to offer up a metaphor that people can read to use to understand their life.
Oh, that's
and
beautiful.
In that way, strangely, nothing actually, all I'm giving them, I hope, is a window into themselves. I don't actually want to give them a window into me. They don't care about me. They don't care about me, really. They care about themselves as well they should.
Well, that is...
Right?
No,
Does that make sense?
It's beautiful. It's beautiful because if one stops and thinks about all the very memorably powerful books or subjects that one has written and that changes and shifts one's whole thinking. Yeah, that is true. It's this artwork of exploring this terrain and putting it together into your own. Well, I guess it goes back to that Sagittarius idea of creating your belief system, and only oneself can do that. I mean,
yeah, and I want to talk about that belief system. It's really, I mean, I was talked about it some at the beginning, but it's, and maybe your listeners are, maybe they hear that, creating your belief system, and they've heard that before, but take a moment to think about that. You've heard the phrase, seeing is believing. Oh, you wouldn't believe it until you see it. And it's true to some degree, but I think it's truer to say that believing is seeing. You will see what you believe. You will see, in fact, I remember I was walking down the street one day, and I thought, and all these people were passing me, and I thought, we're not walking down the same street. Everybody is walking down their own street based on what they believe about the world. And so a book I wrote a piece for the New York Times called An Autistic Son's Lesson, No One is Broken. And it was about how raising a kid on the autism spectrum helped me see a world without broken people. And it was a critical perceptual shift, because if you believe there is such a thing as a broken person, you will see them. You'll see them in your son, who behaves differently than other kids. You'll see it in the mirror if you haven't published a book and you think you should have. You'll see it in your father, who says things to you you don't think you should. You'll see it in the president or the vice president. You'll see it all over the place. But I couldn't raise my son if I thought there were broken people, because all I would do is try and fix him. But the only way I could see him as not being broken, because especially when he was younger and his behavior was so dramatically different than other kids, the only way I could see him as not broken is if I understood that no one was broken, no one anywhere ever. No one. No one is broken. And so that began a practice for me of looking at the world and saying, what if no one is broken? Not anywhere ever. No one has ever been broken. Not me, not Sawyer, not nobody. And that was a perceptual shift. And now I didn't see broken people anymore. Or if I did see them, I would have to I would have to look at them. Why are they behaving that way? Why do they look broken? Oh, because they're afraid. Oh, because they're angry. Oh, and what is fear? Fear is just a perception. So you see, when I believed in broken people, I saw them everywhere. And when I decided there's no broken people, I don't believe in that anymore. I know there's a lot of people who look broken, but I think that's a misperception. And when I stopped looking for broken people, I didn't see them anymore. Does that make sense? So that was a belief that changed.
Yes.
That was a belief that changed. And I built that belief system.
Oh,
and then I began seeing, and then I began to live in the world I was trying to create by fixing people. I lived in it by simply seeing it.
Everything you're saying is absolutely right on, for many reasons. I just went to a workshop with an astrological group called ESAR, or it's International Research for, I should know ESAR, for societal, it has a lot to, it's about astrology.
Oh, my word. Okay.
Yeah, it's long. But at any rate, it's all about consulting and the skills. And that essentially is the whole idea, to listen and because there's various ways of identifying what you've said, but I also had an aha moment thinking back to earlier times in my life when I wasn't always trying to create something, because then you're trying to get things set up and whatnot. But looking at life and people, or in the consulting idea, is that you're listening, and just what you've said is true, that rather than fixing, because people aren't broken, they're just at the stage and they're at the experience that they're at, because our brain does think of this linear idea, okay, A to B, so if there's a problem, then that's how it's going to get worked on. But that eliminates this whole beautiful idea that it goes right back to what you were saying, is that we believe what we see. There was a story somehow that I've heard that when some of the explorers came to this nation or this
yeah. I think I know the story about the boats.
Yeah, that they didn't see the boats because they didn't think that there could be boats.
Yeah. No, it's true. And if you've ever lost something, and you're sure it's lost, oh God, I lost I know it. I lost it. If I lost my checkbook, I know it, and it can be right in the drawer. But if you believe you've lost it, you can be like looking right at it, and it's not there. It's not there. In fact, I remember I have this hat that I go running. This running hat my wife bought me, and I stopped running for years, but I went back to running, and I was like, and now it's raining here in Seattle. I'm like, I got to get that hat again. And I'm like, oh, where is it? I can't find it. Oh, damn, I must have lost it. And so I just couldn't find it. So I had to wear this hat I didn't want to wear. And so I was like, I should get another hat. And then one day, just recently, I was staring at my closet, my coat closet, where I normally keep the hat. And I looked up at the top shelf, which is cluttered with all kinds of stuff I should really just throw out. But there it is. And I said, God, that's a cluttered shelf. I'll bet you the hat's up there. And literally 15 seconds later, I spotted it. There it is. Because I believed it was there.
Well, belief
and it was.
Is amazing. This week, well, and I should mention to our audience that we are pre-recording this because I have some travel plans, and it worked out well with Bill to do this. And so it was partly with the idea that I'm going to be traveling. Well, in those travel plans, I thought I had to really get away. And without going into any detail, I finally realized, no, life could be simpler, because the point is that if you have, let's see, I'm trying to tie this together with belief and journeys, because belief is a journey, how you put it all together. And this whole process, whether it's physical like a hat or whether it's a trip, you have to, let's see, I'm not bringing that together too well, but it is.
But I think belief is a journey. You know, I think because when I talk to writers, I go around and I give classes, these workshops called Fearless Writing. I teach Fearless Writing workshops, where I really deal with the emotional challenges of being an author, and there are many. And one of the things writers have to deal with in terms of belief and the journey of writing a book, it begins when you have this idea. Oh, I want to write this book. And so it begins, and so you write the book, and the journey begins when you start, and it never really ends, but there's all different stages of it. You know, there's the writing of the book, and then there's the finding of a publisher, and then when it gets published, the journey continues as you go out and you get to talk to people about it. But all along, and this is the part that's very hard for so many beginning writers in particular, all you get, Sue, when you want to publish a book, when you want to write a book, all the evidence you get is the belief that the story you want to tell is valuable. And the only way you know it's valuable is that you think it's valuable. That's all you get. You don't get any other evidence. And that light, the light of your interest, has to be bright enough, has to be enough of a beacon for you to follow it. And you follow it all the way through the writing of it. You have to follow it through the publishing of it, even when people say, I don't want it. No, this book shouldn't have been written, as people will do. You follow it when you get good reviews. You follow it when you get bad reviews. That's all you get. The belief that this is worth sharing. How do I know it's worth sharing? Because it's interesting to me, because it's valuable to me. And I'm going to translate this valuable idea into something someone else can perceive. And the only light you get is your own interest, your own belief, your own. And really, you know what? Belief is even too weak a word. You know, you don't believe you're interested, you are interested. There's no belief involved in it. It's experiential. You're interested. But you have to decide that that's enough for you to follow it, with no knowledge of where it's going to go, no knowledge of how many people are going to read it or where it's going to be published. You don't get to know that. All you get to know is that you care about it. And if that's enough for you to go on your journey, then you go. Oh. And I think that's true of all journeys.
Oh, Bill, this is perfect. This is ideal. Just to let our audience know, we're taking just a short break here, but this is with William Kenower, author of Author Magazine. He's written 3 books. He's in Seattle. He blogs, and check back with Talk Cosmos, and we'll continue. take a break from this week's edition of Talk Cosmos, let's take a look at this cycle's archetype. We are currently in the Yang period of Sagittarius, ruled by the largest of all planets, Jupiter, the Roman god, or Zeus by the ancient Greeks. By leaving a cycle based on power and powerlessness of life and death and regeneration, involving committed relationships, Sagittarius energy finds meaning for an expanded perspective and potential for actualization in their search for truth. As a mutable fire sign depicted by the centaur, Sagittarius is adventurous and seeks the beyond. Sagittarius travels to far places, physically and mentally, to find the truths of life.
Celebrate your star energy blessings. Schedule a natal astrology chart consultation with Talk Cosmos host Sue Rose Minahan. You'll learn to better understand what personally fuels your soul's seed direction. Sue focuses on your questions to connect you into your unique heart's desire and your true soul path's birth essence, including a recording and a copy of your chart. Schedule by emailing info@talkcosmos.com. That's info@talkcosmos.com.
Hello, this is Marie O'Neill with Padma Life Coaching, and you're listening to Talk Cosmos on Alternative Talk 1150 AM, where we discuss the meaningfulness of our roots in the stars.
Bringing good vibes to the Puget Sound and the world. Alternative Talk 1150.
Hi again, Sue Rose Minahan with Bill Kenower. Here in Seattle, we're pre-recording on this great date for December 8th, and we're talking about publishing. And Bill has wonderful information because of experience writing and author. You know, I just looked at the paper. There are so many articles that just are springing up. For instance, here in Seattle, Garfield High School, a teacher just gave his students monies so that $50 each, they could go to Elliott Bay Bookstore.
Oh, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah.
And buy. He said, "Go." That's a lot of money. Now, it's $50 each he gave them.
Yep, it was. They bought 450 books.
What the hell? All right. Yeah, so we could go to discover the pleasure of buying books. That's very cool.
And to be able to read them, because really, this whole idea of the Sagittarius energy, which we're talking about with publishing, but getting these thoughts, this voice that wants, and not just wants, but needs, has to get out and be expressed as part of the whole development of the development of the ninth house and Sag Jupiter archetype, is it shifts the thinking, as we know, but it in a way it doesn't have any time reference. In one way, it's immediate. Like right now, there's all kinds of articles about democracy, or about I saw something else about a black priest, the first black priest. Well, we wouldn't know about that unless it was printed. Or what about climate change? Do we believe it or do we not? Which are put in. So yes, he wanted students to learn about the value system of books.
I think one of the values, I think, of the bookstore, the library, the bookstore, that doesn't get discussed often enough is that the individual goes in and what are you interested in? It's all there. I mean, you can read, I traveled for a long time in the world of fiction, and fiction is broken down into almost infinite permutations of what they call genres: science fiction, steampunk, fantasy, high fantasy, low fantasy, funny fantasy, mysteries of like 17 different kinds of mystery novels, and suspense and literature, all different types. And then nonfiction, almost any category you can imagine has been written about. And so the person goes into the bookstore and what do you want to read about? What are you interested in? There's not a more important question I think a person can ask themselves than what am I interested in? What is interesting to me simply because I'm interested in it? And bookstores are one great place to ask that question, because you can find something to answer it on some level, I think. And it helps you learn who you are, what you're interested in reading. And I think, and writers for sure, I feel like I learned that even deeper in the writing experience, because I'm saying not just what am I interested in, but how exactly do I want to say it. So it's another, for instance, so I wrote fantasy novels. I was very into fantasy, like Lord of the Rings sort of stuff when I was a kid. Loved it. And so I read it. And then I simply had to write it, because wasn't enough for me to read it. I wanted to feel that coming through me. I wanted to start from nothing and see what I could imagine in those worlds. And so the bookstore, the blank page, where we ask ourselves, what am I interested in? It's a great way to learn really who you are and what direction you want to head. It's a great question to ask. What am I interested in? What do I care about? Not because someone else cares about it, but just because I do. It's a great question.
That really connects the opposite access. It integrates, and if this is priceless, actually, just trying to say it in a nutshell, but the Gemini Sagittarius archetype, because Gemini is interest. It's like, what is my world?
Oh, okay.
Going out there and trying to gather information, but the Sag, getting this perception going, and it's so true. It's like the infinite realm of wishes, really, when you think about it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anything. The mind, any thought can come floating across. The sort of the light beam of your attention can land on absolutely anything. What do you want? What do you want? What are you interested in simply because you're interested in it? Not because of what it will bring you in physical rewards, but what the pleasure of focusing your attention on it. What is that? What is it that it's a great question. And I think a lot of people don't ask it. I think artists have to ask it, but I meet people sometimes who are not really just want to survive. They're really just trying to not be unhappy. Basically, it's a kind of just like, well, I want a job and I want money and I think I want a partner, but they just want the very basic things, and that's not really the answer to the question, what are you interested in? It always goes beyond the dirty business of not dying. There's something, it's a deeper question, and it really points you to something, I think, eternal within you, whatever answers that, something timeless.
Yeah, the soul, part of that whole
the soul. Yeah.
Another area is, I've noticed, the audio. It says how is that working with publishing? Is that
the audio? You mean like audio books or podcasts?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Or
audio books?
Yeah, I love audio books. I mean, I just loved them from a practical standpoint. I could be driving or whatever and listening to them. It's a little different because you hear the translation of the person reading it, and so they bring small inflection into it, and so they bring their own interpretation, which changes it ever so slightly, but it's still very pleasurable experience. I don't think it's a lesser experience. It's just slightly different because you are bringing yet another person into the equation, and no matter what that person does, they can't be as neutral as the page, as the black and white on the page. But it's nice, because if you have a little company. You get to be with another person hearing kind of as you hear this. I mean, it maybe it goes back to having a book read to you by your mom. Having someone. I actually, it's interesting. I kind of became a fan. I don't know. There's a book called Ulysses by the Irish author James Joyce. Yes. Very famous novel, very difficult to read for many reasons, but a kind of a pivotal book in terms of the modernist approach to fiction. And I had tried it a couple times, and I just couldn't. I liked it, and then I struggled with it. And then one day I was in my 20s, 24 or so, and I was living in LA. I thought I wanted to be a screenwriter in those days, and I was living with my good friend Chris, who wanted to be an actor at that point. He's now a writer, but he wanted to be an actor, he thought, and he had a beautiful speaking, baritone speaking and reading voice. He was only in his 20s, but he already had this great, mature speaking voice. And I had lugged along a copy of Ulysses with me to LA, and he dug it out of my bag or whatever. Oh, look at this. And he started reading it aloud. I said, Bill, listen to this. Listen to what he's doing. This is so cool. He's like writing a chapter in headlines from a newspaper, and listen to this. And he starts reading it to me. And that was when I understood the book, was hearing him read it to me. He brought it to life in certain ways. And he did the same thing, actually, now that I think about it, with the book Franny and Zoe. Was it Franny and Zoe? No, Raise High the Roof Beam Carpenters by J.D. Salinger, which is an odd little novella. And he sat down and just read it to me over the course of 2 nights. He read the whole story to me. And I just loved it. And he brought that language to life. But to hear it, see, the thing about having books read to you, this is true. If you go to a book reading, and like an Elliott Bay book, like a bookstore,
they're wonderful.
These can be very dodgy experiences because it doesn't always translate the crowd of people listening to a book. It's such a private experience. But having one person read it just to you, and you sinking into the sort of meditative state that you have to go into when you read, allowing yourself to just listen to the whole thing, that works for me. That's very close to the reading experience. I don't know what all that means, but those are my takes on the audio portion of.
They're valuable. They're valuable,
Well,
and it does reestablish that whole beginning journey and the imagination too.
Oh, it's
the
critical.
visuality and using more senses and etc. So because really the many
Actually,
ways.
can I speak to that just a second
please.
about the imagination? This is a story I like to tell, but it's fascinating. It's true. So I mentioned my son Sawyer. So he was someone who struggled with a lot of different things, but he was doing school. He was doing his best, and he was in 6th grade, and he was in English class, and they had assigned him, and he was a kid who didn't like to read, but they had assigned him a deeply literary lesbian retelling of Cinderella, and which is fine. It was beautifully written, but man, it was dense, and it was really ornately written and slow. But by God, I was his dad, and I'm going to do a good job, and I'm going to sit with him, and we're going to read this thing aloud. So, okay. So we sit down there, and I'd say, okay, so you read to me, and I'm going to be with you. Okay. So he opens the book up, and he starts reading. She got on the horse, and then the horse drove, and then she got her bow, and then she shot the arrow. And so he's reading just like that, and I'm just starting to fall asleep. It's so boring to listen to, but I'm trying to be a good dad and help my son with this. My poor kid but he's reading. I finally just stopped him, and I said, Sawyer, look it. When you read this book, when you're reading this book to me, are you reading it like a grocery list? Like you read every word, like she, that's a word, went, that's a word. Or are you picturing the story in your imagination as you're reading? He said, I'm just reading it like a laundry list. And I said, then you're not reading, because the far more important part of reading is not the words, but the imagination, the bringing them to picturing them in your mind, the bringing them to life, whether it's a story or even if it's a work of nonfiction, a work of ideas. You still have to sort of picture, conceptualize those within your own imagination. Reading is not a passive experience. It is a highly active experience. And every writer I know, with a very few exceptions, began as avid, voracious readers, because that was the first place they learned to write, because that was the place they brought their imagination deliberately into focus and made it deliberately create things. They were helped along by the author, who gave them the words and the scenes and the characters. But every author knows they leave tremendous room for the reader to fill in what they started. And so every young reader is learning to use the muscle of their imagination deliberately.
Yeah,
reading is an active experience.
Oh, you have said this just ideally, because it goes right back to vision, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it allows,
Absolutely.
They're connected, which is, again, back to Sagittarius and what we're in. It is that journey, as we've been talking about. It's a a whole process. You know, some other articles here that just because they bring up different ideas of how publishing different items, like for instance, there's one woman who she just passed, and she would go to corporates meetings, and she printed out. She was always interested in going to these meetings, according to the article, and asking all kinds of information about the corporate, how they were run, and et cetera, ahead of her time. But she would publish or print out a little booklet with all her thoughts and whatnot. And that book actually gave her a press, to the White House, a press, what would it be?
Press
called?
pass?
Yes. So, in some ways.
Really?
Yeah. Her name is Evelyn Davies.
That name sounds familiar.
Yeah, she just died. It was just in Seattle newspaper. Well, somehow in the last couple of weeks, because I've been going through all of it. But really, when it gets down, I know that there's another publishing, a big company that goes around to different cities trying to get people to sign up with them. And so I went. It was a couple of days free. It was, I think, last summer before last. And the idea is that they were saying that the books are really like your calling card.
Yeah, well, that is one approach to the book, to books. The book as especially for nonfiction writers, that's often the case. Yeah.
And
go ahead.
Well,
go ahead.
I'm also wondering from the writer's standpoint. Well, like you've already said so great information about this whole journey of expressing, and that it's really for the reader to interpret, to personalize into their building structure. But as far as the author too, I'm wondering, and I'm trying to say how to ask this, because I'm wondering what I want to ask really. But that growth process of knowing what the beginning is, the middle, and the end, in a sense, but especially not so much for fiction, but maybe more for.
So let me say this about nonfiction and books and calling, the kind of concept of the book as a calling card. And I think that one of the important things that authors, it was helpful for me, is when you become an author, what you're saying to the reader. So one of the courses I'll teach at writers' conferences, one of my favorite classes to teach, I might actually write a book about this. We'll see. I might talk to my publisher about it. It's called Fearless Marketing, because writers hate to market, but they have to market, a lot of them, and they don't like to do it. They want to sit alone in their room and write their stories. They don't want to market. So I help them deal with the emotional challenges of, I don't tell them how to market, but I help them get over hating marketing. So, and one of the ways I do that is one of the things writers don't like to do is say to people, buy my book. Come on, buy my book. And they feel it's obnoxious. They don't want to be salespeople. They feel like it's bragging. It's kind of braggadocious. And so they don't like all that. And so one of the things I think is very helpful is to understand that your book is simply your offering of an opportunity to have a particular conversation. You're offering readers an opportunity to take part in a particular conversation. So I wrote a book called Fearless Writing. Is Fearless Writing about writing? Not really. I don't give a lot of writing, like solid how-to writing advice, but there's a lot of advice about how to get over your fear of writing, how to forget about the reader so that you can write. And there are many opportunities to question your talent, question your value, and as soon as you do, well, you can't write. And so it's a book about the emotional challenges of writing. It's a spiritual self-help book for writers. Well, do some people want to talk about that aspect of writing? And some do not. Some just want to know how to write a good sentence, how to get a snappy opening, how to write a book proposal, and so on. But for the people who are interested in the emotional challenges of writing, well, they could buy the book. They could go to my workshop. They could work with me one-on-one, whatever they want. But it's a conversation. That's one conversation to have about writing. And that's the one I want to have. And there's a lot of people, it turns out, who want to have that conversation too. So you want to have a conversation about astrology. You're interested in that. That's the conversation, one of the conversations you're interested in having. And if you were to write a book about that, on your particular take on astrology, because there's a lot of people who are interested in it, but everybody's interested in different ways, well, you would phrase that book. That book would be an opportunity to have this kind of conversation about this subject. And if you look at it that way, I think it's a very friendly relationship to the concept of sales and promotion and marketing. It's really just saying to people, hey, it's like being at a big party. You know, people over there are talking about sports, people over there are talking about politics, this woman over here is talking about astrology, this guy over here is talking about the spiritual side of writing. What do I want to talk about? I could talk about any of these things.
Oh, it sounds fun.
Yeah? Yeah,
it does.
That's a good party, right?
Yeah, well, it sounds fun because you can really just ride out on the carpet, it seems, in your own mind. And when you talk about the emotional part, it reminds me back to the beginning, as you were saying, that writing is that thought process that is different than the physical, but it also brings in all that, for some people, more the emotion. You know, it's the whole.
You know, and I'm sorry, I said thought, but thought and emotion are one and the same for me, because every thought carries with it is like a vessel of felt. For feeling. And in fact, when I teach writing, one of the things I say is, no one cares what happened to you. We only care what it felt like when something was happening to you. Writers are feeling merchants. That's what we're selling. And a thought is really a way of looking at the world and looking at the felt experience of life. So absolutely, you are, as a writer, if I don't know the felt reality of what I'm trying to write, I don't know what I'm trying to write. It's never purely intellectual.
Okay.
Does that make sense,
Oh,
guys?
yes. Yeah. In fact, I had a great thought that just kind of went right out the window, but that's okay. I mean, because it is so solid. I mean, it really is. It's all interwoven in there. And dealing with that does take some. I wanted to ask before your podcast, when is that? How does a person tune into it?
Okay, so it's called Author to Author. So it goes live on the internet every Tuesday, almost every Tuesday. I'll take a couple of weeks off in December, but every Tuesday at 2:30. But most, I think, listens happen on archives, and you can listen to it on iTunes. And so go on to iTunes and grab it there, and they're all in there, all 200 or 300 shows, whatever they are. And every week I do a conversation with a different writer about everything. We talk about writing and life. So we talk about their lives, what it takes to face a blank page and say, what do I want to put there? And so, I've been doing that for several years now. And I think, like I said, I got about 300 shows in there, and they're all, and iTunes is probably, but it's on Blog Talk Radio if you want to find it live. But if you Google author and the number 2 author. Actually, the best thing to do is go on WilliamKenower.com. That's the hub of my internet empire.
Yes.
So everything about me is there. Author Magazine, my books, my coaching, everything. It's all there on WilliamKenower.com.
And for those people, too, just to remind, you could go to Talk Cosmos, because I have Bill's under William. Yeah, he's listed there with it. And I mentioned about the author to author, but maybe I'll add on that. It's on Blog Talk Radio at 2:30 on Tuesdays. So
2:30 p.m. Pacific time.
Okay, that's right. PT time.
Yeah, because I have listeners worldwide.
Oh, boy.
Don't you know?
Well, this is important because communication. Oh, that's right. Now, what was that question? Because it had to do about the voice. That's what I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Because we have a few minutes here. Finding the voice for an author in that whole process, like you were saying about relating a little bit about it, but the story. And I suppose that really gets back down to experience and education, and also just connecting with that feeling. Because
voice, where does voice come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, voice, I think voice is an expression of what you're interested in. Really, it comes across because it's, if you think about it, it's your voice is going to be present in every word that you put down or every word that you speak. And so it's really an expression of your point of view. what you value. And so it'll be expressed in the subject matter you choose, and then it'll be expressed in how you look at that subject matter, what you choose to include in that subject matter and not include, what you choose to focus on or not focus on. So when people speak, they're speaking voices. They emphasize certain things. They don't emphasize other things. Their voice rises or falls depending. And so it's really an expression. If you want to find your voice as a writer, find what you really care about. It's deep agreement with yourself. That's your voice. It's deep agreement with yourself.
Oh, that's
not shouted, not whispered, deep spoken agreement with yourself.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much, because one can begin to think about teaching. Now, is it teaching? No, it's about the experience. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes. For next week, we'll just take a few minutes because we're not closing immediately, but just to make sure that people are aware. There'll be the last week of Sagittarius, and at this point, potentially, Shannon Hayes will be rejoining me. She spoke much earlier during Gemini, and we're going to talk about law, because law is involved, and there's many, many, many other factors with Sagittarius, which is the beyond, and it's the collective social reason. And part of me keeps wanting to teach it, but at the moment I'll just acknowledge that. And to remind people that today is William Kenower, an author of several books. In fact, I have one of his books that I've dearly loved, and that is, I think it's the author's, Right Within Yourself.
Probably,
Yeah, an author's companion. They're just ideal little synopsises of that promote and just sort of connect oneself to the whole writing experience. Because without sharing our thoughts on some avenue of communication, which is what we do as in the human species, we can elevate. We can elevate our dreams, and we can elevate our visions, and we can elevate our beliefs, whether it's how we consider any of the issues that we are confronted with in this world, or else how to integrate that soul, as you were mentioning. So do look at the anyway, I'm spattering here about thank you. Check out Talk Cosmos and Bill Kenower too.
Yeah.
Well, Bill, we have about 1 minute, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
here's what I'm going to leave your listeners with.
Okay.
If your listeners are interested in ever being a writer, you will open the portal to your own genius the moment you stop caring what anybody thinks about your stuff. The moment you stop worrying whether your ideas are good enough. In fact, one of the worst questions a writer can ask themselves is, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? Am I good enough? I found my own genius, or I found the window into it, because I think everybody has one. When I sat down and thought, everybody has what it takes. Everybody's good enough. And I'm not going to worry what anybody thinks about it. What do I want to write about? That's where your genius is. Get out of other people's heads. Get out of their heads. You don't know. And here's the other thing. You don't care what anybody thinks about your stuff. You really don't. You want to share it. But the fact that other people like or don't like your stuff can't change the fact that you do. So care about the fact that you do, and let that be enough.
Oh, boy. Thank you. That is the Sag arrow. Yes. Out ahead. Thank you. Thank you, Bill.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for listening to Talk Cosmos, the show where Sue Rose Minahan and guests unveil astrology's ancient archetypes that continually build the collective experiences in our unconsciousness. Be sure to tune in next Saturday at 6 p.m. to continue finding your roots in the stars.
preceding audio was via a Skype call.